Welcome to our continuing series on what we called third space thinking. I see some familiar faces in the room, so some of you have heard this already, but it's a consequence of spending a couple of years wandering around between New York and Silicon Valley and the great Northwest, asking mostly people in the private sector, but some nonprofit as well, when you hire people, what are you looking for? What skills are you looking for? And when you promote them, what skills are you looking for? And so they told us, and we listened, and we went back and forth. And sort of 2 years later, we came up with a framework that pulled together the kinds of issues or competencies, talents, if you will, that folks said that they needed. In a very non-digital, almost pre-literate way, we have put this on a very fancy thing called a postcard. Many of you in the room will not remember a postcard, but a postcard looks like this. It's low-tech. And on the one side of this technology called a postcard, there are these 5 things, these 5 talents that people at IBM and that people in Silicon Valley and Microsoft, et cetera, say they are interested in. And they involve 360-degree thinking and 4 other things that I will let you look at on the postcard. We have been really extraordinarily lucky in this series that has been addressing what are these attributes? Can you really teach them? How do you define them? And as importantly, we have been fortunate in having people who come to this session and think a little bit about how these 5 things work together, either in a particular company like UPS or Disney, or think more broadly across these 5 and see how they intersect with other functions in organizations, whether they're profit or nonprofit. And today, Professor John Boudreau is going to help us and lead us even further in that direction by looking at an enormously important issue that is understudied. And John has been really leading an effort across the United States with a number of some of our leading Fortune 50 companies to look at the way human relations, HR, personnel issues intersect with the demand for these new kinds of skills. John and I we've been having conversations literally, usually in airports. So he's running through in one direction through the thing where they pat you down, and I'm running the other direction, and we have like 7 minutes to talk about the most important things in the world. So for us, this is a real treat to have Professor Boudreau here with us. So it'll be more than just a 7-minute dash through the airport. And I think he's going to really help us think about how do these human relations functions intersect with these new kinds of talents that the people who hire our graduate students and undergraduates tell us that they need to have. So without further ado, let me welcome John. And I know we all very much look forward to what you're going to say, John.
Thank you very much, Dean Wilson. Thank you. Pleasure to be here. I'm going to put this here, see if I can connect even better. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for coming. That's I won't make too much of the fact that there's also free food, which I don't know why, but my sessions get a lot better attendance when they give away food at them. That's okay.
Food for thought.
Food for thought, indeed. Well put. Well put. So thank you, Chantal, for all the support and everything leading up to it. And Jim, back in the back, has been doing yeoman's work with my materials, which have some media embedded in them and all that stuff. So he's one of those tech people that you just hope you get, who will be conscientious and figuring out problems. So thank you. So again, it's a pleasure to be here. My first experience with Dean Wilson was coming to the end of the security line at LAX. And this, rather large black man is standing at the end, and I get to the end, and he goes, "You're John Boudreau." And I'm like, "Uh-huh." And he said, "Yeah, we know you." I said, oh, okay, sort of waiting, and I said, I guess I'm pleased, and he said, yeah, and then he introduced himself, and as he said, we had a chance to talk about this Third Space Initiative and how it intersects with what I do. So it's a pleasure to bring it home here. So I've got a few points to make, and I'll sort of work through them, but I'm hoping maybe we can get a chance to chat a bit too. You guys expect me to finish at 1? Is that a fair statement?
What tends to happen is if you finish at 1 o'clock, people go to 1 o'clock classes.
Okay, so before.
If you finish a little, 10
Okay.
minutes before that,
Good.
then it leaves 10 minutes for Q&A, and then some of us will be able to stay after.
No, that's fine. That's exactly what I was hoping to learn. So I may move kind of quickly then and give you a sense of, what's in here, and then hopefully leave a good deal of time for us to talk about it. So I won't, my usual protocol when I'm teaching would be to ask for reactions along the way, but I think I won't this time, just so we can kind of get it all out there. What I'm going to talk to you about is the result of, some of you may know, I'm affiliated with the business school. I'm a professor in the business school in the management and organization department. And then I'm also a research director at a thing called the Center for Effective Organizations, which is a 35-year internal think tank within the business school that looks at effective organizations. It began 35 years ago looking at things like empowered teams, which was a big deal for those of you that were born then, and some of you in school. And it's sort of it's headed by Ed Lawler, who is a real icon in the field of organization effectiveness and HR, et cetera. Sue Morman, Chris Worley, and so over the 35 years, it's become probably one of the top, maybe the top center for what it does in the world. So when I came here 10 years ago to USC from Cornell, I left a center there that I helped to found and was directing, and came here to this one. So that's kind of the intersection of my work then is around organization effectiveness, and then I came here having done a lot of work with this thing we call human resources, which I think will soon have a different name actually. And I'll talk to you about that. Okay, so that's kind of where we're at. So the next book, the book I just sent to the publisher, has a title something like this one. I think we're going to call it "Lead the Work." And the idea is that leadership, all these things that are on this card, needs to focus more on the work and not so much on the assumption that you're leading the employees of your organization. And it turns out to be kind of a big deal. If you take away the idea that work is done by employees, a lot of the systems that we use to manage work kind of get thrown up in the air. So what is, and I'll show you some examples, but what is, who is your worker group? If it's not just the people that are employees in your organization. We do employee engagement surveys. Well, who do we survey if the work is also being done by people who are not our employees? How do we know what fair pay is when pay is being set maybe by somebody else out there instead of us? And I'll give you some examples here. So that's kind of the latest work. And then I'll also talk to you about some earlier work we did around some trends that I think might interest you. I'm thinking of this as maybe a chance to put this idea of work and the workplace in the middle of USC, and to think about kind of a multidisciplinary perspective on that place that all of us spend 60% or more of our time. And it's kind of crying out for some institution to do that. Okay. So this is kind of the start. Almost all of you know about engagement surveys or satisfaction surveys. USC has one. So here's this company called Apereo, and they have within it an organization I'll talk to you about in a minute called Topcoder. Apereo has 700 employees, and they got voted a best place to work. And I'm sure they surveyed their 700 regular full-time employees to find out if they were best place to work. But Apereo is a company that delivers freelancers to projects. And they have 700,000 freelancers that they deliver for work. So it starts to get, that's what started me thinking about, well, if you talk to the leaders of Apereo, they're actually trying to lead 700,000 workers. And that's who they need to pay attention to, because that's who's going to make their organization work. So it really does kind of, and what we're finding, and again, I'll give you examples, is that idea that our employees are where the work gets done, it's not that we're not always going to have employees, and maybe most of the work is going to be done by them, but an increasing amount of it is done in other ways. So who are you really trying to engage if you're a leader? So this is the Topcoder part. I'm beginning to think that no one will write a web or phone or mobile application with actual employees pretty soon. Because the best coders in the world, not all of them, but a lot of them, are on a platform called Topcoder. If you're on Topcoder, you can go in and bid on, and put yourself as available for projects that companies put out there. So when big companies need to write, for example, when Apple put its new operating system out there, you might say, well, how are we going to get people trained to write applications on that, right? So Topcoder does contests. So it put a contest out there, and it said, in 2 weeks, we're going to have the best coders in the world come solve this riddle on the Apple iPhone. Go figure it out. And they had probably 10,000 people up to speed on that operating system within 2 weeks and ready to get ready for this contest. Many of them not employed by anybody. Many of them employed by somebody, but not doing coding, because they do their coding over here. So you get the idea. There's this ecosystem of workers out there that is increasingly being delivered without employment as the intervening thing. So I'm just going to give you.
Can I just ask one question? Is it without employment, is it without pay also?
No. These people get paid. In fact, the best coder on Topcoder gets paid almost 10 times what the average coder gets paid. One of the reasons that the founder of Topcoder, Narinder Singh, told me that companies use Topcoder is because they couldn't possibly do that if they were employees. They have no way to pay their best employee in a job 10 times what the average gets. Imagine if we did that at USC. But Topcoder removes all that because they've set up a system where performance is very objective, the pay is set on a very transparent market, and hey, if you're that good, and the answer is kind of, if you want to earn 10 times more, go look like this person. And we've got the platform where you can see what's hot, you can see who the best are, all that kind of thing. So let me give you an example of kind of that transparency and the idea of how a culture, I'm trying to make this kind of multidisciplinary. So if you're interested in culture, this doesn't have to be about interested in HR. If you're interested in work and you're interested in culture and you're interested in how communities form, well, you might say, well, these are independent people, they all just put themselves up for bid. No, they all come to one place to watch other people code. It's like a big party.
I think I won. So what happens is every competitor spins the wheel 3 times. They have to choose 2 of the designated APIs, and then they get to build any app they want and they have to deploy it to any cloud platform that they would like as well.
The design problem that we're trying to solve is, what is the Topcoder logo? What should it be? What should it look like? And so we're putting it out to the community.
Extremely interesting to watch the evolution.
Where you going?
Just going over to the scoreboard, check how the round's going.
Behind me, we're currently watching the marathon match, which is a single problem that competitors work on for a period of 12 hours.
So these guys have been sitting here for 7.5 hours now.
Well, in between now and then, you'll probably see a few of them like this, sleeping.
I've made a lot of friends from Topcoder over the years. That's one of the reasons I love coming here, because I meet so many smart people, and I make friends that I keep.
So you get the idea. None of those people employed by the organizations they deliver their work to. And there is yet this community forming out there of these workers that have all this in common. And they come together. Literally, what they're watching on the monitor is the code being written by some of these people, or the logo being designed. You get the idea. For me, it just calls up the notion of, and when we see this, and we talk about it in our book, companies are starting to try to duplicate this. They're running their own internal contests. They're trying to give transparency to their best people. But mostly in companies, there's a very traditional approach to this kind of thing. And yet this suggests, if you're going to really form a community, it's possible to do it even without employment. So that's okay. That's one thing. And you can say, well, just like we said, probably nobody will ever buy anything on Amazon except books, because who would buy produce off of Amazon? Who would buy a diamond ring off of Amazon? Well, we know how that went. Right now, a lot of companies say, oh, that's fine for coding, it's highly observable, et cetera. So, okay, maybe you won't do all your work that way. But here's another interesting dilemma. You're Siemens, which makes elevators. It's a United Technology company, and they make big things like monorails and stuff like that. And they also make hearing aids, and they created a hearing aid suitable for children. So here you are in Siemens, and you have lots of wonderful employees, and you have a marketing department, and you need to market this hearing aid for kids, right? So your work issue could be defined as, we have to go hire marketers that are good at marketing hearing aids for kids. Okay. Think about it. You go to the market for marketers that love children, that want to market to children. That's the work you have. And if you define it as an employment problem, you have to go hire people that are good at that and get them to work at Siemens. Now, all due respect to Siemens, where do the best marketers for kids work? Are they going to work at Siemens? Is that like they live their lives and they grow up and they go to school here and they go, oh my gosh, I hope I get a job at Siemens, right? Where do they want to get a job? Disney, of course. So let's redefine the problem as a work problem. What if we say we need to lead the work, not lead the employees? You start to say, look, rather than compete with Disney for the best kid marketers in the world, which will never win, not because we're not a great company, but because that's not where they want to work, why can't we borrow Disney's employees? Siemens already had a partnership making elevators for Disney. Let me see if I have this on here. Okay, so I'm going to spare you a bit of the video here. Siemens already was a partner in Disney helping them with their rides. Somebody brilliant said, wait a minute, we already have a contractual partnership. Let's go borrow their marketing people. And they produced, it's not on this slide, but you can go on the web and look, they produced a comic book, a picture book about children with hearing and how you're different but you're not less and all that sort of thing. I mean, just absolutely brilliant. When you see it, it just brings tears to your eyes how much this is going to help kids. And when they finished, everybody went back to their employer. Everybody stayed employed by their employer. The brilliance was Disney and Siemens realizing, why don't we just borrow each other's employees? Why don't we just loan employees? And to me, it sort of reframes the notion of what we mean by the talent ecosystem, the talent war. Most companies, I think, would frustrate that they can't attract the best because Disney's got them all, or Google's got them all, or something like that. Think of another great example. I was just working with the leaders at Visa, and they said, you've got to come see our innovation center. So Apple's doing this a lot, but with Visa, you put Visa leaders, Visa designers, and you say, and if you're Visa, you say, we think that the iPhone, is going to be a payment vehicle. So you could go try to hire the best engineers for the iPhone in the world, the best app builders in the world. You could try that if you're Visa, and I think you run into the same problem. No matter how great a Visa you are, nobody grows up wanting to work at Visa to do that work. But Apple's got them all. If you're Apple, you say, we would really love to know the ins and outs of the payment system. We'd love to have relationships with the banks. No bank is looking at Apple to make a relationship, but for 50 or more years, they've had that relationship with Visa. Visa and Apple put their best people in a room together. And they had to reveal, they put it this way, we had to reveal things to those Apple people that we haven't revealed to anybody outside this company in 50 years. It was the only way to get the connection made. They talk about APIs, which are like the doorways into computer programs. Like how does an app reach over and use the map program? So it's like, and there's a human API at work here, where you have to loosen up your boundaries in order to let the people create. And it was, like, here's the question. Imagine the discussion about whether it should be called Visa Pay or Apple Pay. And somehow, those two sets of workers from two different companies had to work out a compromise and agree that it would be Apple Pay. And nobody left their company to do it. This was, we're going to bring your employees together, we're going to bring our employees together. So who's leading that? How do you know if performance is good? Now you've got two companies where you have to put that together. Just practical things, like how do we know if somebody did a good job? How do we appraise their performance for that year they worked together? We got to bring people together from Visa and Apple to do that.
John, can I ask you a quick question?
Of course.
What comes to mind here is that a lot of our students will go into the entertainment industry. Mm-hmm. And as you were talking, it sounds like a more institutionalized version of the way the entertainment.
Yes.
I mean, someone once said, every movie is a new company.
Yes.
You've got to bring together a new producer and a new director and a new writer and new finance. So do the people, could it be the case that part of what we're seeing is a movement toward the entertainmentization?
Yes.
Of these organizations?
You could put it that way. So you certainly could put it that way, the entertainmentization of work in general. I find when I do that people get the wrong idea, and they think it's about producing movies or it's about media or something like that. But your concept is absolutely right. It's called the Hollywood model, and it's actually been the subject of, there's a lot of people in here who know more about it than I do, but it's been the subject of a lot of study. And it is a model. It doesn't have all the elements you need, but it's a very interesting beginning point to say, what would it take? For example, Screen Actors Guild provides a safety net and infrastructure for things like insurance and benefits and things like that, that allows people, I mean, when I moved here, it allows them to move around. It allows them to have some security. It allows them to have a place to put their pension savings, et cetera. So it's kind of a different definition of what a collective or a union would do when you look at it this way. There's a union called the Freelancers Union. You can go look them up, that is attempting to be that kind of an institution for a broader group of freelancers out there. So you can see why this goes way beyond HR. I think it goes way beyond even companies. There's just so much to study here. There's so much interdisciplinary stuff of interest about how one forms communities, about how ideas move through an ecosystem, about the nature of what a culture is. And again, my feeling is that this microcosm of, I'm going to call it the work, not the employment, but the work that we do, wherever we do it, however we do it, is it kind of opens that up. And we're sitting here in a place where that's already been built and developed for a long time. You know, when I moved here from Ithaca, New York, because I was at Cornell. And I had never met anybody that wasn't employed by a regular organization. You know, I mean, everybody is employed by the university or something, and they may have a restaurant or something. And I moved into this neighborhood where people were putting kids through school in LA, paying, my God, I couldn't believe it, what they pay, had houses, and they were people that, like, there's a guy who lives next door to me, works with Disney right now, maybe for them. He writes cartoons but doesn't draw them. You know, and he's had a whole career in LA working project to project. And it was just an eye-opener for me even then, 10 years ago when I came, at how different the world looks when you're here. And what that opens up. You know, it opens up flexibility. It opens up the opportunity to dream in a way. It opens up the idea that tomorrow I really could be doing something different. And I think for a lot of people who are employed in regular companies, that really, it doesn't look that way.
We just have to make sure that we don't, in this process, recreate CAA.
Yeah.
As the intermediate.
Well, you know, I mean, you're joking, but it is another, there's a real interesting element here, I'll get to it maybe in a second, about, from a public policy standpoint and from a social policy standpoint, what is the infrastructure we want to create to enable this? The debate right now in Washington is about good jobs, and I've had some discussions, among them the guy who used to run, he's now at Airbnb, I think, but he used to run Obama's White House personnel function, just to name drop. But, you know, we were on a panel together, and because he's from Washington, somebody said, you know, how do you feel about Obama's job initiative? And, you know, the debate began to go around good jobs and, you know, the whole thing. And there's a really good kernel of a debate in there. But I'm beginning to think that I want to change the word jobs to work. That maybe the key to getting people the work that's good is to get out of the idea that companies have to create jobs that make it happen, and instead create some infrastructure so that those really talented people, not so much the top people, because they're going to always be found, but those really talented people in the middle, so to speak, have a platform by which somebody can find them and know what they can do.
So you have a trade association that says, we'll put in a little bit of money, which gives us access to that group, which then provides the support. So it's like TIA-CREF.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like that.
Like
it's all
mobile.
portable, it's mobile, and those trade associations are beginning, the pieces of them are beginning to come platform, like I'm working with an organization that's developing a platform where one of the problems of this, I just wrote a blog about this, is that, here's a great example, the language of work, trade associations, part of what they do is they let me know what you did in a language I can understand, because we're in the trade. You see what I mean? So imagine the dilemma of veterans. I'm a squadron commander in the Air Force, and I want to go work in the private sector. And I put my squadron commander job description in front of you. There is virtually nothing in that job description that lets you know that I'm actually one of the most talented leaders, one of the most talented creators of solutions that you could probably ever find. Because the military doesn't need that. They know what a squadron commander is. It's like they're on these little islands. So a couple of the companies I'm working with are developing platforms where you can tell about your work and then algorithms will translate it so that somebody in another kind of organization can see what that means in terms of what they need. So what I'm getting at is, that's like, when you start to pull this apart, you see that, oh, you know, one of the things trade associations do is they provide a language where people can understand what the work is and what people can do. Right now, those languages are held within companies. It's like, I guess USC has one. I mean, because I'm a professor, I wouldn't have to partake of it, but like you fill out a skills form. And that tells the university what you do. And they're always after you to keep it up, and you know, and people say, hey, it's all on LinkedIn. You know, why do I have to do this one for you that nobody will ever see, that only works here? If I ever move, it's all going away. And that's kind of what these people have recognized is, what if we created one that was yours, that it was portable, like LinkedIn is, but that it was much more effective at communicating across all kinds of occupations and institutions what you can do. So you may have been you might have been a project manager, and your organization only knows you're a project manager, but you're also one of the best coders in the world. Well, where's a place where you can have all of that visible to somebody? So you get so it's a great observation. You can see, I'm hoping you're beginning to see, I could just see like 100 PhD students working on something. You know, what does that language need to look like? And what is the way people perceive work across institutions? So so I've talked to you about people getting paid, to your point. Can you get work done and never pay anybody? Absolutely, and actually some of the people in the room have been studying the crowdsourcing. So this is my favorite example of solving a problem with people who never were employees and never got paid for it.
In other news for you this morning, there is a group of gamers. They have cracked a scientific puzzle that stumped AIDS researchers for years, and they did it in just 3 weeks. Researchers at the University of Washington, stuck in a roadblock, put the problem to video game players using a program called Fold It. The gamers quickly developed a protein structure that could help fight HIV and AIDS. And joining me now is Seth Cooper, creative director at the University of Washington Center for Game Science. Also here is Faraz Khatib, a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Washington Biochemistry Department. It's good to have you both on with me this morning. Seth, I want to start with you because your department created this game, Fold It, which was used to solve this puzzle. So explain to all of us in layman's terms how it works, and were you surprised by the results?
Yeah, so how Fold It works is we're able to take the biochemistry problems that the scientists are working on and post them as puzzles in an online game. And then we have an energy function that we got from the biochemists that can basically take a protein structure and give you a number that tells you how well folded that protein is. And so all the players who are playing the game are rated and ranked based on how well folded their protein structures are using this energy function and scoring function. And then we can take the best, highest scoring results and give those back to the biochemists for analysis.
Faraz, you set up this experiment using gamers that had little knowledge, little experience in biochemistry. Why did you want to enlist them to try and solve these really complex scientific problems?
Because in this particular case, every single experimental method had failed. For 12 years, crystallographers have been working on trying to solve the high-resolution crystal structure of this particular protein, and all those methods have failed. The latest and greatest computational methods to try to do this using supercomputers and all the computing power that we have in the world also failed. And so it was really a last-ditch effort and a hope that the gamers would be able to crack this. And yeah.
So you get the idea. Not a paid person in that whole thing. If you look up the research paper about this, the refereed scientific research paper, I think it was the Panther Folded team is an author, along with the PhD scientists on the paper that reported this. And it's just, to me, like a visual of how the world of work and how the world of academic research is changing when you think about this. So that's these are kind of tidbits of things that in the new book we're trying to bring together and create a framework for. But very much to your point about, you start with the Hollywood model, and then you look around you and you start to see freelancers, and then you look around you and you see these contests. And while all work won't be done by non-employees, it just begins to tell me we've got to redefine the nature of how we think about work and leadership, from being I'm done when I lead my employees to being much more about leading the work. Maybe I've got to be leading employees of another employer, or what does it mean to lead these people?
So arguably, since the law of the hammer operates here, so anything I see you put up here from third space thinking.
Oh, so I see. You're going to hit with this hammer now.
Right, so that's
Cool.
the hammer. But it seems to me that whether those are the right ones or not, then the leadership that is willing to do really weird stuff.
What looks weird now?
And permit gamers?
Yeah.
Come
Yeah.
on, I mean, that's not serious.
Right.
They have to have a different set of skill sets. And then the students who we teach, who may have an inclination to go into this sort of freelancey, institution-less environment, need to be taught different things, maybe in
Yes.
different ways.
Yeah.
Which in turn means we need professors, right, who
Yeah.
could teach that weird stuff.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think it's less weird the longer we go. So, if once you know that Visa and Apple collaborated the way they did, IBM did the same thing, by the way. I'm actually writing a case with the head of HR for IBM for the book too. And Disney borrowed, Siemens borrowed Disney's employees. I think what happens is your employees start to go, why don't you do that? I have this great product, and the marketers here are not the best in the world. Why can't we get the best in the world like Siemens did? So I think even if you're an employee, you see this thing beginning to encroach in. Why don't we have contests like those top, why can't I do some of my work on Top Coder? I'm better than anybody there. One employer in Minnesota turned out had one of the best coders in the world. Little, tiny operation. And, this kid went on Top Coder and he got recognized. Twitter's recruiting him. Everybody's recruiting him. He's the best coder in the world. Smart. The employer went to the kid and said, would you be willing to stay with me if I let you earn money on Top Coder? And the kid said, yeah, I don't want to leave Minneapolis, but I'd have to if you wouldn't make me this offer because I want to go work for Twitter. But I can work for Twitter from here if you'll let me, in a sense, moonlight. So that's what I'm thinking about is we're going to have, the future employees of the world they're not ignorant of this. And they're going to expect, I think, organizations to put this kind of thing into their bag of tricks. It won't be enough to say, our employment system doesn't allow it. It won't be enough to say, but look how good we treat you as an employee. I think they're going to say, yeah, but this exists. And one of the interesting things about IBM, I'm right in the middle of writing this and getting it approved with the head of HR. IBM's created a lot of this internally. IBM created a system for its internal employees where they break certain projects up into small pieces, and you can volunteer to do them because you want to show IBM and others in IBM that you have a skill that isn't in your regular job. And they've got several of these. So IBM is my example, and I know Diane well, of this is what a big company does to create it inside. And it's sort of, and some of it goes outside. Like some of those projects can be done by an outside freelancer, and so there's a kind of competition between the two. So you get the idea, this idea of work.
Let me press a little bit, because IBM has really, really been helpful to our innovation lab. They've been very, very helpful. And so we've sort of been using them as case studies also. We have one on the website. And they're really cool. They do this agile stuff. They created a whole new, they knocked out a couple of floors in Manhattan, that thing I know that you've seen.
Absolutely.
And so I said, wow, that's really cool. I'm going to use them in a lot of my case studies. But they're not doing so well in their market. IBM really has been declining.
Indeed.
Their share price has been going down. So how do you handle that, people? John, of sort of cool practices that seem to be doing the right thing, but the larger organization is not doing so well, which then arguably makes a less interesting case?
Yeah. Well, part of it, and I think legitimately so, and this is what companies will say, is that, there's a million variables that affect company performance, and I know you know that. And so I long ago sort of gave up the idea that someone was going to say, we brought John in and he consulted with us and then our share price went up. But much as I wish that would have happened. So I think it's particularly in this area of people, it's quite possible to be doing really good things that don't show up immediately. And I think that's what Diane will say, is these things we put in place are going to create a work environment for us that we can see, and we can see it inside. she would say, that we can see very tangible things happening about how we innovate, about products that are developing. That doesn't show up in the numbers that investors want to look at. And I've talked with investment analysts and bankers about this, and they've said that's absolutely right. We don't look at anything that isn't within 3 months of happening. And we get it, John. You can tell us that these investments in people made 5 years from now are a good predictor of how the company will be doing in 5 years. But they've literally said, even if that were true, that's not our job to predict 5 years in the future. I think it should be somebody's job, and I think investors should be more aware of it. But again, you want another research project. Part of what fascinates me is to get in the heads of people making investments. And it's, again, all due respect to them, but it's amazing how the model they have for how people stuff creates value is unbelievably superficial, particularly compared to the model they have for how technology creates value, or how money movement creates value. So I know it's not that they're not brilliantly smart. I've started to say, the term I coin is there's like their engineering brain, if they're engineers, and then there's their people brain. And at the same time that an engineer will tell me it would be stupid to try to maximize the performance of every component of a product, some things just need to be good enough, other things have to be terrific. They will tell me, I need the best person in the world for every job I have. And all I have to do is put those two statements side by side for them, and they suddenly realize how silly they are about people, because it's exactly the same problem. So so that's what I think is going on. And I'm not saying IBM, all of this doesn't necessarily result in performance. It does make a better case study. Part of my early work, actually, this is going back to another area that I work in, is about mapping those connections, about getting better at saying, what does an investment in people do inside that creates the stepping stones to something happening that investors can see. So that's like my other research agenda, is doing projects on that. And companies and investors are surprisingly unaware of kind of where the pivot points are. Is better engineering the thing that'll make the most difference? Or is it better channel relationships? Or is it better marketing? Networks. And too often organizations sort of say, I want the very best people doing everything. And again, it's as silly as saying, I want the very best machine everywhere I want the best computer in the world on everybody's desk. It's kind of like, well, no, you know why you don't do that. And the fact is, most organizations don't need the most innovative accountant in the world. They don't. They don't need the best accountant in the world. They need a really good middle-level accountant who wants to be right at standard. So this is like a whole other presentation, is the logic of how people create value.
That's next Thursday.
Yeah, sure, if you want to. I'm a professor, I can just go. Now, we're at a quarter of, and I had a couple of other things I was going to show you, but I kind of feel like we're there. And rather than introduce a bunch of new things, I think we've kind of got that point on the table for today. So I'm going to stop, and we have about 12 minutes before 1, and thank you for your questions, see if there's, anything else in the room. If you don't say anything, I'll just drone on with my other slides. Yes.
Related more to journalism, in the sense, when you were talking, I kept thinking about this time in journalism where if you were a print journalist, they wouldn't let you do television. If you were a television journalist, you were not respected by print journalists.
Interesting, yeah.
And web journalism wasn't even part of it. And so what started this trend of allowing, I know what happened in journalism, but what was it that started this trend where people begin to realize that you could bring in, consultants, basically, into the company, or that people can shift back and forth? I don't know how it started. Was there a company? Was there a project?
I think some of it, I mean, it's a really good question, really good area for research. And I will say at the start, I'm sure I don't have anything like a complete answer, but I'll hit with my hammers and we'll see. So I may just, let's see, who have we got? Jim? Where's Jim? Is he still in here? It's okay, I was just going to shift down to, I'm tempted to shift to the last slide, so we just have something up there that isn't this. What this is about, I'll leave it up there. What this is about is the kind of policy issue. So on the left side is, you can get a lot of people like Robert Reich at Berkeley writing about how horrible this is going to be for workers, and I'm going to answer your question. Okay. But on the left you see the this is awful. We need to create good jobs. We need to get people to be regular employees, because if they're not employees, all the risk shifts to them. You know, you get work or you don't get work based on how good you are. Employers stop training, because why should they train it? Somebody's only going to be with them a short time. We need to lock people into employers. We need to get them long term so that the investment pays off. It's going to be the death of a career, because nobody's going to stay long enough. And organizations, what should they care about careers? I don't even know if you'll be here. You don't want to be here. It's commoditizing work and people. It's going to be the chase to the lowest cost possible place in the world where I can get something done by the lowest cost person who can do it. And these systems are very, very capable of doing that if you let them. And it's worker exploitation. Okay, so that's the left side. This is a research study, because the right side also exists. Transportability, a common language of work, lets you find the work that's best for you wherever it is in the world, and you're not stuck in an employer who doesn't have anything for you to do with that talent you have. Yes, employers may not train as much, but Topcoder doesn't have much trouble getting people to train themselves on the new Apple operating system just by running a contest. And who said training and learning has to happen inside the company you happen to be in with MOOCs, I think our president still isn't that enamored of MOOCs for the university, but nonetheless, I'm not saying they're the answer, but there's a lot of learning out there, and there's a lot of communities of learning out there. Is it the death of the career, or is it a boundaryless career, where you can go from Siemens to Disney if you're a great marketer and go work there for a while? IBM does that. It loans its employees to its partners and its clients, and they go work for that partner or client with the idea that they're going to come back better qualified for IBM because they got an experience IBM could never provide them. I don't know what the answer is here, but so anyway, you get the idea, right? That there's this wonderful world and there's this horrible world, and it's kind of like saying, well, you can have the worst of Uber, you know, drivers that you don't know who they are, and drivers that, you know, I mean, we've all read the horrible horror stories, right? Or you can have the best of Uber, where somebody figures out how to vet them, how to track them. I was just reading in my little Larchmont Chronicle, I live over by Larchmont Village, about 3 entrepreneurs, all Wharton, Stanford business people, 3 moms with kids, who realized they needed Uber to drive their kids around to you know, so would you use Uber for that? No way. It's kind of like I wouldn't use Amazon for anything but books. But these moms are vetting essentially babysitter level people to do, so they pick up the kid from school, they sign them out, and they're vetted up one side and down the other. So again, you can say horrible, you know, it's like Uber, it commoditizes and nobody knows who they are. Not that Uber doesn't, I mean, I use them a lot, they add a lot of value, but I gotta say, you know, those guys need somebody helping them with the people stuff. And I think it's perfectly clear that they do. I don't think, you know, and then there's these moms who are beginning to come up with a system where you'd actually let your kids ride in a car with somebody that you found on this service. You know, and so it just, you know, so that's what that was about. Okay, so now remind me of your question. Oh, it's journalism. So I think so how do people start to span these silos that used to exist? I think one thing that drives that is just economics. So we've gone through periods where you couldn't find the talent. We're in one right now, where many organizations cannot find the talent they need. It's part of what this is about. Not that you're not turning out a lot of great students, not that the world doesn't have a lot of unemployed people, but the match between what they are and what the organization believes it needs isn't precise. So there are huge talent shortages at a time when we also have, in some regions, you know, historically high unemployment. So I think when you're a leader and you can't find the person you need in the silo you've always looked in, you're forced to break the silo down. When you break the silo down, you now have to redefine the work so that you can see it somewhere else. So now I have to, one thing we talk about is I deconstruct it. So in journalism, I say, well, I used to think that my print journalist needs to have all of this stuff, you know, and I'm not sure what all it is. But there's a part of that job that's actually common across all journalism. And if I break that out, I can go find someone else who can do that. And as long as I don't shackle them that they have to look like everything in the reporter's job on a newspaper, there's a part of that job that's maybe investigation or something like that, that's true about all journalism. So you deconstruct the work. This is one of the principles in this new book. And when you deconstruct it, it often opens up a view that if I don't trap it in a job, if I sort of free it up, I can see it happen elsewhere. It's like coding. Coding is a part of lots of technical jobs. But if you break it up and you let it be separate, you can create a platform that can get the whole world of coders. But then you've got to reconstruct the job that it was in, and I think that's what happens. And so that's like, it's not a complete answer, but it's like with the hammers I'm hitting with today, that's kind of where I think what I'm writing about would fit that.
Let me call on Professor Patty Riley here, because I saw her taking notes and looking provoked.
She may be
and,
just writing her grocery list, man.
No,
I mean, this
no,
is like
calling Uber.
It's very unfair. I would do this to my MBAs. I'd never do it to a fellow professor. Anyway.
That's quite all right. Thank you for this. This is very thought-provoking. Most of your
Patty has done a lot of the work with the Navy and with Hollywood and with government agencies and nonprofits.
Oh, terrific.
Sort of in this space.
Yeah, and actually a lot of my students have taken your classes.
Oh,
so thank you
wow.
for that as well.
Well, hope they're saying good things. But anyway, thanks.
Oh, absolutely. Otherwise, you would have one student.
Well, thank
Word
you.
in Annenberg spreads really
Okay, we'll have to
quickly.
talk afterwards about that. Good, cool.
Yeah.
So you were saying.
Right. So just using your two columns up there as an example, most of the success stories that come from the notion of new work are, part of that 80-20 rule, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like MOOCs. They
Yeah.
are wonderful if the kid could have gone to USC or Stanford or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
They're very motivated, they're extremely smart, all of that. Do you know how much research is being done on the other 80%?
Yeah. I don't, Patty, but it is, so I don't know, but I don't think much. I can't find it. And what I can find is sort of research on the processes by which these things operate. That's great. Some of the folks here have done, Janet and a couple of others have done some work on crowds and managing crowdsourcing using principles about reward systems, getting people to share ideas, not just vote on ideas, et cetera. But, so one of the things that I'm talking quite a lot about now with heads of HR is that they need to get involved so that these systems get good at the middle. And to me, it may not be a bell curve, but there's a lot of people still, whatever that curve is, there's a bunch of them in the middle. And so for me, my concern is that there are really talented people that are pretty good at things that are not going to be the one best person or the 10 best. It's like utility athletes. And these systems need to work for them if they're going to work. And the social contribution of this new world of work is going to work. It's going to happen if we get to that middle. And I think it's just overlooked right now in the rush to sort of either go to the left side, which is the world that the best in the world, it's kind of the winner-take-all world. If you're the best program in the world, Topcoder's a great world. If you're the best designer in the world, Tongle or these other platforms are a wonderful place to be. But there's pretty good designers out there. And these systems are just as capable. It's kind of like that good enough thing with leaders of saying, you've got a middle-level job you need done. The last thing you want to do is try and chase after or pay the best person in the world for this. But have I got thousands of people that love to work at this level and that are perfect for you? And so I think if we can make that, and I don't know what it's not the glamour part of the distribution of performance. It's not the glamour part of building these applications. And that's why I think that's why I kind of wish that that governments would start to think about good work and not just good jobs. Because I think that's where it's incumbent on them to start to create the social platforms and the social norms and regulations that would make it happen.
And
Great
the
question.
educational systems
Yes.
and making sure that we're not driving creativity, out starting in elementary school.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I think that's right. So platforms like this for elementary students and getting, kids already are getting used to Khan Academy, and getting used to the idea that the knowledge and the learning exists in a community, in a cloud, really, in that case. And I think organizations are getting there, but they're sort of late to the game. of saying, let's create it. For example, my colleague Carrie Williard literally created an app when she was at Sun that Sun said, oh, you can just own that. It wasn't that they didn't recognize its value, but basically she got to keep it. And it is essentially an app where you can literally on your phone say what you know as you discover it, and then upload it into a curated sort of cloud system so that someone else can find it. And that, to me, is kind of what we need to start creating socially. I really feel sorry for, for people who are great at X, but it's not used in their job. There just isn't enough opportunity for them to be seen by the world. Do I have to find another job that does this, but do I want to leave? And so that's what I love about, look, you're in Siemens, you may not be the best marketer in the world, we'll go get, but the Disney ones could work on a hearing aid for this organization. In the same way, Siemens can go the other way. We at Disney are not great at building monorails and big metal things and stuff like that. Rather than trying to hire a bunch of people that can do it, you can do that, you can do that over here at Siemens. So that's what I love. I think I could not agree with you more. The vast majority of people work in companies like 80% of people work in companies of less than 500 people. So they're not going to have IBM's HR system. They're not, and so that's who we need. That's whose work experience we need to change. And I have the privilege of working with the one percenters, the people that employ thousands of people, and I love it, and they're great. But what I tell them is, you've got to help me take what you're doing and get it out to the work that affects 80% of the world here. So you're right.
Let me just we try to have one tradition here where at least one student asks one question.
Oh.
Otherwise, the dean will call on them if they don't volunteer. So could we have a volunteer among our students, if there are any students in the room? You're setting yourself.
This is just like my classes. This is really so familiar.
Grad student graduating. Thanks. I'm a grad student graduating over the summer, but on staff here as well. And you'd mentioned at the top of the presentation about how HR will probably have to reinvent itself. And what are you seeing? Because I'm very interested in the talent management side of HR, but not any of the other crap of HR of like. I mean, it certainly has its relevance in terms of benefits.
That's the technical term.
Exactly, it is, yes. Yeah. It has its relevance in when looking at benefits and the benefit structure of it, but in terms of the application and that part doesn't interest me. So do you see kind of a breaking off of the talent management side of it versus kind of the administrative aspect of it? Or like what did you mean in terms of HR will have to redefine itself?
So there's a lot. So it's a good question. There's a lot of dimensions to that. So yes, let me call it the operating model of the human resource function. You've all got Workday now, and it'll get better. I mean, it does. It gets better in every organization. It does. I see hundreds of organizations that have done it, and I work with the people that do it, and so it gets better as you learn it. And that's an example. Workday is a good example, frankly, of a platform to which you offload a lot of things that HR used to do. It's not perfect, it's not the best we'll have as things develop, but it's a good example. So the operating model, you're right, is increasingly moving things to platforms or to automation that are we call it the crap, but the administrative stuff, the compliance stuff, et cetera. And a lot of that's being put in the hands of employees or leaders to do. So that's one thing, and then there's the re-engineering of the expertise parts of HR, like knowing about staffing and knowing about training. The part you'd be in if you were a talent management manager, I'm going to be about the principles and the systems, not the transactions. That's going to change a lot. That, for example, I think this is in quite extensively in the book. Talent management looks wherever you look. It looks different. So I did engagement. What does engagement mean when some of your work is done by non-employees? What does your applicant pool mean when some of your work is done by non-employees? What does a career mean if it can span several organizations when you start loaning employees? What does incentives mean when they could include contests and they could include your reputation in the world? So you can go, we call it a talent life cycle. You're attracted, you get hired, you get developed, you get deployed to jobs, you get paid, all that stuff, right? You can put go across every one of those and say, what if our work wasn't being done by our employees? And it changes it fundamentally. So I think that there's a huge opportunity for you to, and I hope to be a part of a profession that's prepared to think out of the box that way, that's prepared to let you think that way about the definition of talent and the definition of work. The CHROs I work with, who are some of the best in the world, they are telling me that the profession isn't ready for that yet. They want that I have a project where I'm just privileged to be working with 30 of them that are all volunteering huge amounts of their time to figure out and change things that, frankly, they thought would be better by now. And some of it is in that arena of we've done great work, companies are doing great work, it's a great world to work in, but we need to be readier for this. We need to redefine this. Great question, thank you.
That's a great answer to a great question and great timing. With a great audience, I might add also.
Indeed.
So let's all give ourselves a round of applause, and especially to John Boudreau.